It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. President Biden says it's time for peace as he unveils a ceasefire plan for Gaza.
Everyone who wants peace now must raise their voices and let the leaders know they should take this deal.
Tonight, Israel appears to welcome the deal. Hamas says it too is viewing the proposal positively.
Also tonight, I'm live in New York, where Donald Trump has spoken out over his criminal conviction. He says he'll fight on, dismissing his trial as rigged and a scam.
We're going to be appealing it on many different things. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything. The judge was a tyrant.
Also ahead tonight, a man is charged with murder over the fatal stabbing of Amie Gray on a beach in Bournemouth. Sir Keir Starmer confirms that the veteran MP, Diane Abbott, is free to stand for Labour at the election. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. It's time for this war to end. The words of President Biden tonight as he made a surprise announcement of a phased plan to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza. Despite appearing to be caught somewhat unawares by the timing of his words, Israel has broadly welcomed the plan. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the war will not end until all goals, including the elimination of Hamas's military and governmental capabilities, are achieved. Hamas has said in the last half hour that it views the plan positively. The first phase of the deal would establish a 6-week ceasefire. Hamas would release a number of hostages, including women, the elderly and the wounded, in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. 600 trucks of aid a day would enter the Gaza Strip and hundreds of thousands of temporary housing units would be provided. President Biden said the second phase would involve Hamas handing over all remaining hostages and Israel withdrawing all of its forces from Gaza. And in the third and final phase, he said the United States would support a major reconstruction plan for Gaza to rebuild homes, schools and hospitals. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
It was an appearance and a statement made with just a few hours' notice, and few were aware it was coming.
Now, after intensive diplomacy carried out by my team, and my many conversations with leaders of Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, and other Middle Eastern countries, Israel has offered a comprehensive new proposal. It's time to begin this new stage, for the hostages to come home, for Israel to be secure, for the suffering to stop. It's time for this war to end, for the day after to begin.
He urged Hamas, who were equally in the dark, to take the deal.
This is truly a decisive moment. Israel has made their proposal. Hamas says it wants a ceasefire. This deal is an opportunity to prove whether they really mean it. Hamas needs to take the deal.
A phased deal, the release of hostages for prisoners, withdrawal of Israeli forces. If all of this sounds familiar, it's because it is. We've been here so many times before, but never with such a public kickstart from the White House. And maybe that is exactly what this is, an attempt by a deeply frustrated president to reassert control. Remember that Gaza is damaging him politically here as the death toll there continues to rise. Israeli forces have now confirmed that they are in the center of Rafah. Not quite yet the all-out battle that Biden had warned against, but close. And with that devastating Israeli attack at the weekend, there are only so many red lines Biden can manufacture and then watch as they're broken. The key question is the extent to which the Israeli leadership is fully behind this proposal or blindsided by it. Maybe they're getting behind it. But remember the splits, Netanyahu and his rival Benny Gantz, who may collapse the government next week. There was just a statement from Netanyahu's office. The Prime Minister authorised the negotiating team to present an outline for achieving this goal while insisting that the war will not end until all of its goals are achieved, including the return of all our abductees and the elimination of Hamas's military and governmental capabilities.
He's clearly trying to reach out directly to the Israeli public and say to them, hey, listen, you have to accept this ceasefire. Because remember, there's a lot of folks in Israel, both in the public and in Netanyahu's coalition, who are adamantly opposed to any kind of a ceasefire and certainly wouldn't agree to a ceasefire that left some core Hamas military capabilities intact, which is what would happen if the war ended right now.
The latest images from our own teams inside Gaza reflect the continued hell. More killed, more damage. And from inside, it feels like there is no end to all this. But a Hamas spokesman said the Biden proposal was positive news and that the group is studying it. Critically, President Biden has said that Hamas is now no longer capable of a repeat of the October the 7th attacks. The question is whether the Israeli leadership agree with that. And then what about the Hamas leaders hidden somewhere here? Free to walk? Hardly likely. A big moment then, but many unknowns too. Mark Stone, Sky.
Mark's with us now live from the White House. Mark, this was a statement from President Biden that took many by surprise, but there does seem to be some response now from both Israel and Hamas.
Yeah, the statement stands distinct from anything that President Biden has said before now. Those words, the war must come to an end, it is time now for the day after. I think those are the words that President Biden wants to be remembered. He has drawn red lines through this war, red lines that have been trampled upon by Prime Minister Netanyahu, a man who I think, although Biden wouldn't admit it, I think President Biden believes he has been taken for a ride at times by Prime Minister Netanyahu. My old friend Bibi, he's called him so many times, but the strain between these two has been great. And so instead of red lines, he is now drawing the line underneath all this. That's it. It's over. And he feels he can say that now for a variety of reasons. I think he feels that the war is at a stage where genuinely Hamas could not repeat what it did on October the 7th. Militarily, politically, it has been entirely degraded at such a cost to civilians, yes, but it has been degraded to an extent that it cannot repeat what it did before. And so although the leaders of Hamas have not been caught or killed, now is the point that he believes the war needs to move to its next phase, to come to an end, to an immediate ceasefire. It's interesting, too, that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been invited here to Washington, to Congress. Republicans in Congress who support Netanyahu and have done ever since October the 7th, they have been calling for him to come. But others on the left of politics have been against it. Now, Chuck Schumer, a close ally of President Biden, is behind the invitation for Prime Minister Netanyahu to come here to Washington. So I think lots of things are quickly coming together. This may have been an attempt by President Biden to jumpstart a process, to short-circuit a process that he has become so fed up with. It's a big gamble, though, making sure that Israel is on side, all the different factions within that government in Israel, making sure Hamas is on side as well. A big gamble, genius if it works, but the chances of it falling flat, given all the times we've heard before of ceasefire proposals, the chances of it falling flat, well, they are still high.
OK, Mark, thank you. We're also joined now from Jerusalem by Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle. And Alistair, what chance for peace now? We have Hamas releasing a statement tonight in the last half hour saying that they view the plan positively.
Look, over the last few months, I've reported many times on progress made in hostage negotiations and ceasefire talks, only for those talks to break down. So you'll forgive me if I'm rather sceptical. This time, there is a difference. The US president has come out publicly and in a way put his own reputation on the line with this. And I think he has effectively put down a bit of an ultimatum to all sides, particularly the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's my understanding that Netanyahu didn't know about this speech ahead of time. It took his team and him by surprise, and they are not happy with it. They think that it could have destroyed any chance of a hostage deal. Having said that, it is clear, as Mark was saying, that the American president and the American administration are running out of patience. They want to see an end to this war. I don't think it is any coincidence that the British Foreign Secretary tweeted in support of it minutes later. Barack Obama, the former US president, also tweeted in favour of it. There seems to be a move now to try and push this towards an end game. I haven't seen any change in the Israeli position. They have released a statement tonight saying that they want to have a deal, but the deal on their terms would also reserve the right to continue fighting. And that is not something that Hamas will accept. So if Joe Biden is going to be successful in this attempt to try and bring the two sides together or try and somehow bring an end to this war, then he is, I guess, trying to do it by somewhat circumventing the Israeli Prime Minister. That is a dangerous game, but it looks as though the Americans are saying now, finally, we want to draw a line under this. Does that mean that they would, still uphold Israel's veto, as it were, in the UN Security Council? We don't know. But it looks as though they are now putting enormous pressure on all sides to come to a deal, and we'll see in the coming days whether or not that is enough.
Yes, certainly the President saying tonight it is time for this war to end. Alistair, thank you.
Welcome to New York, where Donald Trump has delivered an extraordinary speech after becoming the first serving or former US president to be convicted of criminal charges. Last night, he was found guilty of all 34 charges of falsifying business records over a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. Today, he spoke at length here at Trump Tower, just behind me, repeatedly claiming that his trial had been rigged as he criticized the judge, the US legal system, and his opponents. Tonight, President Biden described the speech as reckless, dangerous, and irresponsible. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
Another day, another corridor. Last time the news conference was in a court building with Trump, the candidate. This time, it was Donald Trump, convicted felon.
When the government wanted something, they got everything. They got everything they wanted. It was a rigged trial. We're going to be appealing this scam. We're going to be appealing it on many different things. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything. The judge was a tyrant.
They polished the windows of Trump Tower the morning after the conviction before, for a proprietor stained by criminality. Having changed in status, he sought to change the subject.
The highest level we've ever seen of terrorists are pouring into our country. You have violent crime all over this city at levels that nobody's ever seen before. Crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country.
Fifth Avenue's most famous resident didn't say much new. He might feel he didn't have to. The day of the verdict saw Donald Trump break records on fundraising. This amidst voter backing that remains robust. Supporters were out on the street.
Trump is guilty!
So too were his opponents.
And this guy has gotten away with everything under the sun, and finally he's being held accountable.
The good thing is that we're going to go up in the numbers. We're going to go up in donations. We're going to see Trump on November 5th in a massive red wave.
In a White House news conference, President Biden gave his first public response to a rival who had railed against the U.S. justice system.
And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years, and it literally is the cornerstone of America.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir?
How American voters respond to Donald Trump's new status is, of course, key. It was a criminal conviction on the back of a grubby tale about paying a porn star to silence her story of a one-night stand. How does that play with key target constituencies for Donald Trump, like evangelical voters and suburban women? Outside Trump Tower, a Donald Trump impersonator drove by.
what great people they are here in New York, and we're going to take the city back, and we're going to take it back November 5th. God bless America.
Come on, get off the car. That's not Trump. Come on.
It wasn't long before a small crowd gathered, thinking this was the real thing. To be fair, in a place with a president criminally convicted, reality isn't what it once was. James Matthews, Sky News, in New York.
So the question now is, what could happen next? Well, Mr. Trump is due to be sentenced here in New York on the 11th of July. Experts say it's likely that he'll be fined or put on probation, but he could face a maximum of jail term of 20 years. He'll remain free as he awaits sentencing and will almost certainly appeal against his conviction. There's no legal reason why Mr. Trump is unable to run for president in November, but whether he can vote in that election in Florida, where he's resident, is more complicated. The rules there say Mr. Trump would still be allowed to cast his ballot, but only if he is not sentenced to jail time. If he is imprisoned on the 11th of July, he won't be able to attend the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee in Wisconsin, which begins 4 days later. It's there that he's expected to be officially declared as his party's presidential nominee and where he plans to make a key address. Well, polling done today by YouGov and The Economist gives Donald Trump a 2-point national lead over Joe Biden. How Mr. Trump's conviction plays in crucial swing states like Nevada could be crucial to the election result. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has been speaking to voters in Lake Tahoe and sent us this report.
Almost 3,000 miles from a New York City courtroom, Donald Trump's guilty verdict feels like a distant concern here. But this is where his conviction really counts. In states like Nevada, where small numbers of voters could swing the future of this country. People like Randy Rosa, an evangelical Christian who's voted for Trump twice before and probably will again.
His policies work. You know, I know that's people say, well, that's a Christian cop-out. Well, I don't know what else we have to vote for. I don't believe, President Biden necessarily a clean guy as well.
Do you think people will be swayed by Donald Trump's conviction, or do you think they'll be more looking at gas prices, supermarket prices?
They're going to be swayed for sure. But at the end of the day, when it comes right down to vote time, can you afford to not vote for him?
Across this country, voters are weighing similar conundrums. It's unlikely his base will abandon him, but this election will likely be decided on the margins by those whose voting behaviour is hard to predict.
I have voted for him in the past. I'm a little unsure of who I would vote for now, but the way that things have been going kind of seems like his morals and his ethics are a little off from where they used to be.
Do you trust in that legal system that convicted him?
I trust that the legal system will prevail. So I just want to see where it all ends up. That way I can really be like, okay, this was fair, this was not fair.
Do you think it will factor into your decision in November?
Definitely. I 100% think it'll factor in.
Nevada is key to Donald Trump's conviction, as well as his political future. It was here that he first met Stormy Daniels. The former porn star told the court that it was at a hotel room at this luxury golf resort that she, in her words, spanked the former president on the butt. They are details that Democrats hope will still be ringing loud in voters' ears in November. Particularly here in Washoe County, Nevada, the swingiest in the state, where Republicans will have to roll the dice if they want to flip it back from the Democrats. Do you think it will affect the way that people vote?
Absolutely not. I think he'll have more support now than he had even before.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm already prepared for him to have been our next president again. I mean...
Even as a convicted criminal?
This country loves people who are the bad guy.
Donald Trump is busy deflecting attention from his conviction onto what he says is a broken justice system. He hopes that 5 months from now, the spotlight will be on other issues. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Nevada.
Well, our James Matthews is here with me now. And James, what a 24 hours. I want to almost say, well, rest up, but actually it feels like only the beginning.
Yeah, the Trump show rolls on, doesn't it? He's left Trump Tower behind us, gone to Bedminster, his golf club. There will be fundraisers over the course of the coming week. And of course, fundraiser yesterday, his fundraiser, broke records. He made a point of stressing that at his news conference today. More than $38 million on the back of a conviction. And, you know, Yalda, we're standing here on Fifth Avenue. I was reminded as I sat in that news conference of the day. Remember, Donald Trump said I could go out into this street, Fifth Avenue, and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters. Well, you look at the fundraising, you look at the polls, the robust polls, despite where he is and despite everything that happened yesterday. And who would say that Donald Trump is wrong when he made, or was wrong when he made that assertion? There is a power that Donald Trump carries with him, and it may yet be the power that carries him to the White House. I'm not sure anybody would bet against that right now, criminal conviction or not, when you look at the polls, when you look at the increased funds that are now behind him.
Indeed. James, thank you so much for all of your reporting. And as James said there, despite a criminal conviction, we're still seeing just outside Trump Tower, although the crowds have started to disperse now, but we saw many supporters as well as opponents, and really that sums up Donald Trump, this divisive character and personality, and the Trump show goes on. We've continued to talk about him for 8 years now, and we probably will continue to talk about him through to November the 5th, and who knows, perhaps beyond that, if he does become US president. But here we are on the streets of Midtown Manhattan, continuing to talk about Donald Trump and this case. We will continue our coverage here on Sky News, but for now, back to you in London.
Yalda, thank you. To breaking news now, and a 20-year-old man has been charged with the murder of Amie Gray, the 34-year-old woman stabbed to death on Bournemouth seafront. Our correspondent Alice Porter is here with me now. Alice, what's the latest you can tell us about this story?
Well, police say 20-year-old Nassen Saadi has been charged with murder and attempted murder after 2 women were stabbed in Bournemouth a week ago today. Now, Dorset police received a report shortly before midday that 2 people had been stabbed on Durley Chine Beach in Bournemouth. Now, sadly, 34-year-old Amie Gray, who was from Poole, she died at the scene. And another woman, aged 38, who was also from Poole, she was taken to hospital after suffering serious injuries. Now, she has since been discharged. Now, unsurprisingly, this led to an extensive police investigation, and Nassen Saadi, the 20-year-old that we mentioned there, he's from Croydon. He was arrested 2 days ago on Wednesday, on May the 29th. He's now been charged with murder and attempted murder and is due to appear at Poole Magistrates Court tomorrow.
OK, Alice, thank you for that update. Sir Keir Starmer has attempted to draw a line under the row within Labour over the future of Diane Abbott by insisting that she is free to stand for the party in the election. It follows days of uncertainty after Labour sources briefed journalists that she might be blocked. Our political correspondent Rob Powell reports.
A Labour politician for decades, Diane Abbott is now free to stand for her party again. That a decision for this man, who, after saying yesterday he wanted the highest quality candidates, was this morning insisting the process around Diane Abbott was ongoing.
Well, no decision has been taken, so that's the factual position.
But a few hours later...
She's free to go forward as a Labour candidate. The whip is back with her. It's been restored.
The first black female MP, Diane Abbott, was suspended after writing that Jewish, Irish and traveller people do not experience racism like black people do. She later apologised and withdrew the comments. But suggestions this week that she was to be blocked as a Labour candidate provoked a backlash, with even Starmer's second-in-command apparently straying from the party line.
I don't think there's any reason why Diane can stand as a Labour MP. Look, she's gone through a process, and that's right, and I wasn't involved in that process.
Once a shadow cabinet colleague of Sir Keir Starmer, Diane Abbott has said she'll be staying silent about her future until next week.
Some connected to Labour believe there was a course of events where Diane Abbott was let back into the party before announcing her retirement to a chorus of plaudits. Instead, the row has overshadowed campaigning and shone a light on the ability of the Labour leadership to shut down damaging stories before they start to snowball.
This isn't the only row with the left of the party.
To try and take you away from me, they don't get to do that.
At a rally in northeast London, Faiza Shaheen suggested she was considering running as an independent after being blocked from standing for Labour over social media posts.
When you look at the politicians, like I say, that they have purged, they are women, they are left-leaning. You know, Faiza is the last socialist candidate. As she says herself, she's surprised she even got this far.
If she runs as an independent, I think she'll get quite strong support, so it hasn't done the Labour Party any favours at all.
Yeah, I think he's gone too far trying to win the mainstream vote by purging some of the more left-wing members.
Rishi Sunak has had trouble with his flock too. Today, ex-Conservative MP Julian Knight said he'd be standing as an independent, branding the Prime Minister a disastrous campaigner. But on Diane Abbott, the Tories milking the row for all it's worth.
Well, I think it just reconfirms what we know about Keir Starmer, and that's that he constantly changes his mind. And it's clear that Angela Rayner's in charge of his party and not him. And if he's given into Angela Rayner on this, imagine what he'll give into when it comes to the union's demands, higher taxes, or indeed weakening our defence and security.
Since becoming leader, Sir Keir Starmer has generally won internal battles with his party. Not this time. This row may not shift the dial of the campaign, but with 5 weeks to go, it shows the favourite in this race is not immune to making mistakes. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Well, on your screen now are both of the confirmed candidates standing for election in Hackney North and Stoke Newington. Police in Germany have shot and injured a man who attacked several people with a knife at a far-right event in the city of Mannheim. Videos on social media show a man being shot as he stabbed a police officer in the neck from behind. German media say the far-right activist Michael Sturzenberger was one of those injured in the attack. The Metropolitan Police have appealed for information from Turkish and Kurdish communities in relation to the shooting of a 9-year-old girl outside a restaurant in East London. The force issued an image of the motorbike used in the attack in Hackney, which left the child with critical injuries. It's understood that 2 men were also injured in the attack and taken to hospital. An inquiry has blamed organisational failure within Police Scotland for a crashed car sitting undiscovered for 3 days with 2 people inside. Lamara Bell and John Hewell died in 2015 after their car left the M9 near Stirling. They were found days after the accident, despite police being alerted. Experts have hailed the delivery of the first personalised bowel cancer jab on the NHS in England as a landmark moment. It's hoped that the vaccine treatment trials will now be expanded to combat other forms of the disease. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has been meeting the man who's received the experimental jab.
You've been through surgery and chemotherapy.
Elliot Febway woke up to find himself at the centre of the world's media attention.
How much hope does this new treatment give you?
Elliot is the first patient in England to be treated with a personalised vaccine against bowel cancer. His outcome could change the course of cancer treatment, saving thousands of lives.
It will be a huge, relief, both not to myself, but to my family. I think this is what my family is the greatest dream, that I become cancer-free, and then I can continue with my normal life.
Elliot's cancer was diagnosed in May last year. He had surgery and chemotherapy, but tests showed traces of cancerous DNA in his bloodstream. This meant his cancer could return. So Elliot was chosen to join a trial for a vaccine that uses the same mRNA technology as in the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine.
Because it is personalized treatment, then it would save millions of people's lives.
To make the vaccine, cancer cells are first removed from an individual patient. The DNA of the tumour is then sequenced using help from artificial intelligence. This is then used to create a personalised jab for the individual patient, which, when injected, triggers the immune system to fight the patient's specific type of cancer.
This trial that we're hearing about is in bowel cancer, but we think that things like lung cancer, bladder cancer, some types of breast cancer may also be suitable for treatment in this way.
Elliot's cancer vaccine trial is ongoing. It's too early to say if it's working. If the trial is successful and you are, at the end of it, cancer-free, what would that mean to you?
It's like being born again.
Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Walsall.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by Conservative Home's Deputy Editor, Henry Hill, and Politics Joe's political correspondent, Ava Santina Evans. Amongst the stories, we'll be discussing this on the front of the FT weekend. Trump lashes out at a rigged trial after historic criminal convictions. We'll be right back. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. President Biden has announced a ceasefire plan for Gaza, saying it's time for the war to end. Donald Trump has attacked the US legal system after his conviction over hiding hush money payments. And Sir Keir Starmer has said Diane Abbott is free to stand as a Labour candidate at the general election. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with Conservative Home's Deputy Editor Henry Hill and Politics Joe's political correspondent Ava Santina Evans. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, the Financial Times leads with Donald Trump's speech following his 34 felony convictions, in which he again said the trial was rigged and pledged to appeal. The Mail highlights Mr. Trump's insistence that Joe Biden has created a fascist state. And the Telegraph leads on Boris Johnson's dismissal of Trump's conviction as the result of a hit job. But the Mirror calls the former US president deluded, deranged and dangerous. The Guardian leads on Zelensky's claim that US delays on using Western weapons against targets in Russia has left troops laughing at Ukraine. A poll conducted on behalf of the Eyes suggests that 56% of those surveyed want a new government. The Times reports on Sir Keir Starmer's pledge to create wealth if he becomes Prime Minister. The Express has news of a simple saliva test which can be taken at home and may save thousands of men from dying of prostate cancer each year. And according to The Star, an astronomer who has regular chats with the King has reportedly told him that most people in his profession believe aliens are real. They had boffs, not boffins today. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Henry Hill and Ava Santina Evans. Welcome to both of you. Let's start with Donald Trump, shall we? The front page of the FT weekend. Trump lashes out at rigged trial after historic criminal convictions and no surprises that he's vowing to fight on. He will appeal.
Yeah, of course he will. He's Donald Trump. He has managed to defy the laws of political gravity through sheer chutzpah for years, and he's not going to stop now. Basically, the story is he has been found guilty on all 34 counts. The details of it are slightly strange because it's called a hush money trial, but the trial was not over the fact that he paid alleged hush money to a porn star he slept with, but the paperwork that he generated to pay it back, which is a bit like getting... Precisely, it's a bit like getting Al Capone on his tax returns. But he says so far it has really just driven a surge in donations, small donations and a few mega donors, according to the FT. And given that, as we heard on Sky earlier, it doesn't seem as if this story is going to end up giving him any jail time. The question is, yes, obviously, we're all shocked by Donald Trump, but we've been shocked by Donald Trump for years. If it hasn't damaged him with his own voters, how much of a difference is this going to make to the race, depressing as that thought is?
I mean, we know that technically the 34 counts on which Trump was convicted carry a maximum prison sentence of 4 years. I believe that's for each count. So there are 34. I mean, they could run consecutively. We don't know. But everyone so far has said that's just never going to happen.
Yeah, they're saying that it's highly unlikely he will actually see jail time, but he will see potentially a hefty fine. And as we've said, he will appeal. But that appeal is very unlikely to be before the next election. So he will be heading into the election as the Republican nominee as a convicted criminal. But look, you know, Trump's very excited about it all. He said he's honoured to be convicted by a criminal court yesterday and that America is a fascist state and the prosecution, they're devils. So a good day for Donald Trump. He also made this speech, you know, right where he announced his first run for American president back in 2016. So, you know, he's having a good couple of days in terms of press.
Yeah.
And Henry, he's been repeating the assertion that this is all politically motivated and this is all because of Joe Biden.
So America really doesn't make it easy on this front, because it is the case that the prosecutor who brought these charges was elected to that role, which is very weird to Brits, on a platform of bringing charges against Donald Trump. So that makes it easier when you've got a politicised system like that to drum up these kind of charges and dispute the legitimacy of cases. But it is important to remember that the trial was completely fair. The jury wasn't stacked. You know, maybe the decision to reopen the prosecution was driven by a desire to go after Donald Trump. But if he'd been innocent, he'd have been found innocent, and he hasn't been. So no, this has got nothing to do with Joe Biden. The decision to reopen the prosecution was partly political, but there's no reason to think that the judgment has been.
The front page of the Mirror, their headline there, delude, deranged, dangerous.
I know, why don't they tell us how they really think? Yes, so there's not the best front page there for Donald Trump. But look, this is actually the exact sort of promo that I think he would like. You know, I think they're going to really go after his campaign, will really go after the sort of leftists in America. And this sort of press, if this is replicated over in the US, will really do, you know, wonders for him in incentivising his base.
And that's the thing, they're reporting that they've had record donations to his campaign following his conviction.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a realistic chance that if he does end up with that huge fine, that millions of ordinary Americans will step up to pay it for him, which is absolutely extraordinary when you say it out loud, but that is the general dynamic of his campaign. I think the problem is that America is now so polarised that regardless of, you know, there's no evidence that the court was stacked or that there was anything political about the actual finding, millions of people just are prepared to believe that the Democratic establishment, so-called, is going after Donald Trump. And therefore, whilst hopefully maybe, you know, floating voters will be alienated by this, for Trump's committed supporters, all this really tells them is that, right, the establishment are going after him. He must really be the man we need to back. In the Mail, Ava, the headline there, Trump rages at Biden's fascist state. It was a diatribe, wasn't it, really, that speech that he made today, blaming migrants and whoever else for what's happening to him in the state of America.
It really felt a bit like a lucky dip today. It sort of was, he was sort of rolling the tombola and then picking out, I guess, certain groups that might have made the headlines over the last couple of years and sort of blamed them as, you know, and made this incredible concoction of reasons of why he'd been convicted. It also felt very confused. It reminds you of actually how he was, you know, his sort of style of oratory that we were used to when he was president. It always sort of felt very confused, very hatchet job, very last minute, and didn't quite have a proper flow to it. But, you know, what's really interesting, actually, so this piece, when we get into the inside pages of the Mail, it starts to get into the fundraising. The emails that have gone out since his conviction are fascinating. They are really quite frightening. You know, it's Donald Trump telling his supporters that he's a political prisoner and so they need to donate to him immediately. You know, it's quite concerning that people could be really riled up over the next couple of weeks.
And he is really playing to that narrative that he is a victim, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been his line throughout. You know, the election was stolen from him, and since then, you know, the dark forces that are governing America will stop at nothing to bring down one Donald J. Trump. And yeah, for over here, Trump is funny, right? You know, we're not in that country. When he does his media performances, when he does his weird speeches, like, there is something entertaining about him. But what you were saying is really important, because the level of polarisation that we see in the US is nothing like we've had over here, even during Brexit. And the way that some of these campaigns are reaching out to voters and firing people up is really frightening, because ultimately, yeah, America has to be governed as one country. Whoever wins the election and whoever wins the one after that, you can't have red America and blue America living completely parallel lives. They have to have one president. And at this rate, it's going to be really hard for either side to get losers' consent.
Bringing the story back to the UK, there's an intervention from one Boris Johnson on the case and the conviction of Donald Trump. And he's saying that it was a mob-style hit job and it's likely to make a Trump victory more likely.
Yes, the American-born former Prime Minister of this country has waded into the argument, and he has decided that Trump is a victim of, well, bad lawfare. Lawfare is backfiring, Boris Johnson has said. And there's a few, actually, sort of his I just want to say ilk, of his group that have all backed this idea. Nadine Dorries, she's also been on Twitter to talk about how the trial has been unfair, and this just shows that, you know, if you can't get someone in the polls, then you'll go for them in the courts. But yeah, I mean, this is quite dangerous rhetoric, really. And I'm not really sure what the intent is here, but perhaps Boris Johnson would quite like a job maybe on his campaign.
As one Nigel Farage, who was also saying similar things today. Let's move on to the FT and this, well, shock announcement today from President Biden, but it seems like a really significant moment, a three-phase ceasefire.
Yeah, potentially yes, which is, I think, the only reason that could justify Biden ruining the Trump conviction news day by talking about the Middle East, which divides Democrats quite strongly. Apparently, the US has been mediating a deal, and there is a prospective deal on the table. It's a three-stage plan. Stage one is Israel pauses hostilities. There's some exchange of hostages. Stage two is complete permanent ceasefire and the further exchange of hostages. And I can't immediately remember what stage three is, but I'm sure
rebuilding of Gaza.
There we go. I'm sure it's great. I mean, the slightly worrying thing about this, though, is that it doesn't sound as if actually both sides are on the same page about this. Netanyahu's made very clear that the war will continue until he gets everything he wants, and that he has authorized negotiators to discuss an outline of a deal. Hamas has welcomed a deal that talks about a permanent ceasefire. It's quite clear that Israel doesn't think that there's grounds for one yet. So it is progress, but I think, you know, America needs to take care that this isn't simply the Israeli government engaging with this process to buy time for further operations, which are continuing as of the present moment.
Well, Ava, Hamas have said tonight that they are positive about the deal, but as Henry was saying, Israel still insisting that they want to achieve their ultimate objective, which is the annihilation of Hamas.
Well, Netanyahu's under considerable pressure from some of the more far-right members of the coalition that is keeping him in power not to agree to a permanent ceasefire, and this deal is obviously dependent on that. You know, your first 6 weeks, you're going to have an immediate halting of hostilities. By phase two, you're going to have Israeli troops being withdrawn from large swathes of Gaza, and then by stage three, you're actually talking about, you know, the potential lead-on to defining Palestine as a state. And I mean, yes, if you are struggling to stay in power, that's going to be pretty tricky to agree to.
We shall see. Ava and Henry, thank you very much for the moment. We can take a break. Coming up, Sir Keir Starmer finally gives in to pressure and says Diane Abbott can stand as a Labour candidate, but will she? We'll discuss that next.
I can give you anecdotal evidence of how high cinema prices are, which I'm sure Phil will have an opinion on. The lockdown created habits of viewing, of streaming at our convenience. We love watching TV and film on our phones. And of course, we have great television. We have alternatives. We have gyms. We have restaurants. We have lifestyle choices that we didn't have maybe 30, 40 years ago.
That global figure, of course, is you know, made up of a whole series of different territories. For the UK, we're probably looking at even in terms of box office for this year. The industry analyst Gareth Street have indicated about 1.04 billion. Last year was 1.06. It's undoubtedly true that we knew this year would be a challenging year. We had the strikes for the actors and the screenwriters in the US, which has pushed back the production and the delivery of a large number of films, some into later this year, some into 2025. So, you know, no one would underestimate the challenges. There are broader cost of living issues and people's ability to spend, and we'll get on to ticket prices. But I think as the year gears up, certainly into the summer, into the end of the year, for the UK sector particularly, it's a very optimistic picture.
We all grew up on going to the cinema because Tom Cruise was in a film, these big adventure stories. John Travolta, of course. I'd still go out for John Travolta. And these days, I feel like that cultural space has been replaced by pop stars. So this summer, the events are Taylor Swift coming to the UK. We've had Ed Sheeran filling Wembley Stadium. We've had the likes of Adele. We have these totemic stars who we feel are somehow, perhaps it's a myth, but they feel more authentic, that they are sharing their lives with us.
You're absolutely right that in the social space, you know, pop stars and reality stars, etc., are filling part of that space. But that's complementary to Margot Robbie, to Tom Cruise, to Tom Hardy, to Chris Hemsworth, all those other people who do still drive movies. And, you know, obviously, you know, the studios and distributors are looking to create stars and for people to have resonance with audiences. But actually, it's also about the originality of the stories. So last year, of course, we had the, you know, almost unique cultural moment of Barbie and Oppenheimer together. We have coming up Deadpool and Wolverine, which when the trailer was released was seen by 365 million people in the first 24 hours, which is a record. There is still that excitement that can be engendered around the uniqueness of the big screen experience.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Henry Hill and Ava Santina Evans. Let's take a look at the Mirror and the story of Diane Abbott, or rather Sir Keir Starmer's decision regarding Diane Abbott and whether she should stand in the general election. He said it was still being investigated in the morning, I think, and then by the afternoon had relented and said that she could stand.
Well, I mean, it is still being investigated by the National Executive Committee. It still is in deliberations, you know, sort of quote unquote. But Keir Starmer, for the first time, has actually said that he personally would be OK with her standing. And that is actually quite a huge moment, because what has essentially been happening over the past week is there was a backdoor agreement made with Diane Abbott where she would have the whip restored and then she would quietly stand down at the election. And then that would mean that Starmer never had to actually make an announcement on this. He could quietly have the Socialists leave the party without making a big
Is that confirmed, though, that backdoor agreement?
Well,
or is that hearsay?
Well, sorry. That when I spoke to her, that is how she described it to me, and then when I spoke to other people in the party, that is also how they described it to me. So. In my head, it's confirmed, but I don't know if that's solid enough. Would that stand up in a Trump-style court? But yes. So anyway, so as this week's dragged on, and Angela Rayner coming out yesterday to say that she would like trailblazer Diane Abbott to stand again in the party, that sort of forced Keir Starmer's hand today.
Do you think it's the intervention by Angela Rayner that forced his hand, or the public support for Diane Abbott that we've seen on the streets of Hackney?
Well, I mean, you know, Conservative-home Labour sources aren't what they could be, but I can't think that the intervention of Rayner will have helped Sir Keir Starmer trying to keep this below the radar. And it's a reminder that, especially compared to covering the Conservatives, which is very much sort of, you know, the leader says and everyone jumps, at least until that completely stops being the case and it's civil war. Labour is a much more institutional party. You know, Angela Rayner has her independent mandate from Sir Keir Starmer. The NEC has processes that, you know, there's nothing like that in the Conservative Party, really. I do think that this Rayner's probably going to be the decisive factor, because ultimately he doesn't have to work with the voters of Hackney after the next election, after the election in government for 5 years. But if he had picked this factional battle and then lost it, he might have just judged that the political capital spent doing that was not worth it.
The Conservatives are using the Angela Rayner line as a stick with which to beat Sir Keir Starmer, and saying that he's not fully in control of his party, that Angela Rayner is.
Well, I think that actually Keir Starmer wasn't truly in control of the narrative over the past week. I think that actually the story ran away from him quicker than he could control it. And Angela Rayner was put out to speak to press yesterday because she had heard that the police were no longer investigating her council house and the capital gains that was on that house. And so her hand was sort of forced into answering that question, particularly because she is from that wing of the party and she is quite helpful for the Labour leadership because she sort of curtails or calms that wing of the party from speaking to the press quite as often as they would like to. So I think that the Conservatives are trying to get involved in a story that they actually don't need to. I think that Labour themselves have made a bit of a mess of it this week, and if I were doing the strategy for the Conservatives, I would sit back for the moment.
Meanwhile, in the Telegraph, Henry, Grant Shapps is saying that Labour still can't be trusted on defence.
Yeah, so this is basically the Conservatives trying to use the Corbyn era and the role of senior Labour figures in that era against Sir Keir Starmer. So Shapps' argument is that I think 12 members of the current shadow cabinet voted to scrap Trident when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, and that shows that Labour can't be trusted on defence. Starmer has come back and said that actually Labour has got a triple lock, another one, on Britain's nuclear deterrent, that they are going to build 4 new submarines and everything else. I think that this is a real... The Conservatives keep trying to do this, but I'm really not sure that the salience is there. For you, there might be voters who are angry that Starmer has walked away from some of the more left-wing stuff that he ran the election on, but in terms of the voters who are switching from the Tories to Labour, pointing out, actually, you know, Starmer has moved on from the Labour position and highlighting the Corbyn era, I'm not sure there's that much mileage in it for them.
It's actually 11.
Is it 11?
Labour shadow ministers.
I'm sorry to the one I slandered.
Let's move on, just because we're running out of time, just to the Eye. And this is not a great poll for the Conservatives, Ava.
No, it's not. So this is voters like Sunak's Triple Lock Plus pledge, but 68% are supporting it, but a majority of the voters that they've polled still want a change of government. So there is some support for the Conservatives, but, Conservative pledges, but in terms of their leadership, it seems like it could be over for them.
Yeah, this is a problem Labour had in 2015. It doesn't matter how well your policies poll. If you don't poll well, it's a straw in the wind. It's just lost in the wind.
OK. Henry and Ava, thank you very much for taking us through this news hour. We'll see you in the 11. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, President Biden announces a ceasefire plan for Gaza, saying it's time for the war to end.